I'm joined today by Robyn Annear. Robyn is a writer, historian and podcaster who's authored many books, including this one, Spring Street Things, in which she's gathered together 33 historical objects belonging to Victoria's Parliament House and assembled them in what she calls a playful conversation. Welcome, Robyn.
Thank you, Bill.
So some of the objects here are very special objects, but some are just everyday objects that probably are still just here in the Parliament because no one got around to throwing them out. What made you interested in that approach to this book?
The things that found their way here by accident, or as you say, have remained here by accident, yeah, they are the most interesting objects, I think, as well as some of the ones that are no longer here by accident. It's just the happenstance of that and the serendipity of it that really appeals to me, and it kind of leavens those more monumental, intentional kinds of things, all the busts and the actual things that are affixed to the walls and so on. So I like that. I like that blend. And it's also quite playful.
So let's start with one of the big things that's here, and that's the statue of Queen Victoria that sits in Queen's Hall.
Yeah.
What did you discover about that?
I felt that was a bit of an accident itself. The sculptor was, I think he kind of talked Parliament or the government into accepting one of his Queen Victorias. He was selling them all around the world. And Marcus Clarke, a Melbourne commentator and journalist at that time, called him a dealer more than an artist. The fact that his name is misspelled on the base of the statue, I think, suggests that perhaps it wasn't all his own work. So there's that angle. Of course, the fact that it has witnessed so much in that room also fascinates me. The implacability of Queen Victoria, just taking it all in and saying nary a word. And when you get up close to the thing, of course, and spend some time looking at the details, just fascinating. So much symbolism, as well as, the details of statuary itself. It really rewards a close look, the sandals and the acorns hanging from the bottom of her cloak.
Well, the acorns is interesting because once you notice them, they're everywhere. They're on the roof of the Parliament. They're on balustrades.
Of course.
Why are acorns significant in this building?
I don't know that I really cracked the code of that, other than that, from small acorns, big things grow. But they're part of the whole oak tree iconography that haunts the place. Oak leaves cover the carpets in the most important parts of Parliament. There are, as you say, decorative details that include oak leaves as well as the acorns. And then there's the oak trees outside in the gardens. From little things, big things grow is definitely, to me, what those are speaking of in Parliament. And, it's true. So the Federation oak is your example of pretty much from acorns, big trees grow. A sapling was planted in the early end of the Federation movement, was planted here. They were planted elsewhere too, and those ones tended to die. So this one is special because it's lived on and flourished as Federation has. And the fact that Melbourne, this Parliament, was the home of Australia's first Parliament, it all ties together beautifully.
And while Queen Victoria is obviously overseeing activities here, so for at least sometimes it was William Burruck. It was a gift to Parliament, but it hasn't always resided here. Who was Burruck, and what drew you to writing about that painting?
So William Burruck, or Burruck, was a headman among the Kulin people, and he was very much the headman at Corranderk, the Aboriginal station or property out at Healesville, where the sanctuary now is, which was dedicated to the Indigenous people who were, herded off their lands and told this can be your place forever by the government. It got sort of nibbled away at, and their rights there were likewise nibbled away at over the decades of the 19th century. Burruck had been a boy who witnessed the actual transaction between John Batman and the headman of that period in 1835. He'd been a part of Melbourne since before its beginnings, and here he was, the head of the people at Corranderk, and he was the spokesperson and led the other headmen to literally come to Melbourne, to walk to Melbourne on many occasions, to meet here in Parliament with premiers and with ministers to put the case for that being Corranderk being kept for the first Australians forever. I think now the Aboriginal Protection Board, as it was called, which ran that place and which ultimately took it off them, was vociferously opposed and then joined by a woman called Anne Fraser-Bonn, who was the widow of a squatter and was herself a pastoralist. And she had known Barak through being on his part of the country for a long time. And they were friends and respected one another. So she spoke up also on his behalf. She had this portrait painted of him in the 1880s, I think, and she gifted it to a Parliament. And the library here, Parliamentary Library, accepted it reluctantly and kind of said, well, probably belongs better in the State Library where more people can see it.
And you mentioned the library there. There was, in 1926, the library advertised for 2 junior assistants to join the staff, but the ad was quite notable at the time. Why was that?
Because they were advertising for females, for women, for girls, for young women, graduates. And the two who got those very junior and very poorly paid compared to their male counterparts, those jobs, were highly qualified young graduates, you know, the pick of the bunch. But this was groundbreaking to have female staff working here in the library.
And so you say somewhere in the book that these objects are in playful conversation with each other. Did you go looking for connections or points of conversation between the objects, or did that just sort of emerge naturally?
The connections between the objects pretty much emerged naturally. There were real surprises there, connections I certainly hadn't expected to find. And the way that one thing flows on to the next in the book, I really enjoy the playfulness and the meaningfulness of some of those connections. You know, the fact that we have Queen Victoria's statue in Queen's Hall, and the next chapter is about William Barak and shows an image from the contemporary newspapers of him meeting the Premier with Queen Victoria's statue in the background. It just, one thing bleeds into the next in quite a meaningful way, certainly in that case, yeah.
And after examining all of the Spring Street things, do you have a favourite Spring Street thing?
I have a real soft spot, it's the wrong word to use, a real soft spot for the Canterbury chair. The Speaker's chair, a one-time Speaker's chair from British Houses of Parliament, which was gifted to Parliament by a governor returning home at the end of his exile here. And his father had been the Speaker in the 1830s, the 1810s through the 1830s, and had overseen a very turbulent time in British Parliament, the extension of some sort of democracy to a wider public. And this was his chair. It had been living in a stable on their family estate for some time, but he said, this is just the perfect thing to say thanks to the people of Victoria. So he got it boxed up and sent over here. And there was such anticipation among parliamentarians and you know, the leading people of the city to see this wondrous Speaker's chair. They were going to replace the Speaker's chair, the well-upholstered Speaker's chair in the lower house here with this one. But when it arrived, it was essentially a tea chest with arms attached, and it was covered in rough kind of waxed cloth with a few nails hammered in, and there would have been no comfort or glory to be had from sitting on this. So it was quickly banished to an upstairs room where, in the fullness of time, a rogue parliamentarian who'd basically been locked up for a couple of weeks in these quite comfortable rooms, the parliamentary cell, he found the Canterbury chair there, and nobody knew until fairly recently. He tipped it up and signed his name as a prisoner of the state. That signature in pencil was found only fairly recently, although he was interviewed in his cell by journalists who said that he was sort of lounging across it with his feet over one arm and his arm over the other, and one can picture this. It certainly wasn't what was intended for this glorious gift to the people of Victoria.
Well, and a great connection back to the Westminster system.
Yes, yeah, and this place is full of those. Yeah,
yes.
Yep.
Robin Annear, thanks so much for coming in today and talking to us.
My pleasure.